So folk, I thought I'd do something a wee bit different today. I came across these videos on what Europeans really think of Americans. I came across this one and I've not even watched it yet. I would imagine similar to the other Ian's political responses in there. So I thought I'd give you my perspective. So let's just get straight to it.
Anyone want to try out an American accent for me?
Yeehaw! So, howdy, partner. We're going down to do some shooting.
So stereotypes is always going to be something you're going to come across that just happens to be that in this particular instance, she goes on about that of, gun shooting and it just happens to be gun ownership. And I've watched several of the other videos, heavy criticism from these other, Europeans. And that's the thing, because the people that make these videos and ask different people, but I would imagine that they're asking people that fit their own narrative. These people can sound like the loudest and the majority, but it doesn't necessarily mean to be the case. In other words, you could look at that video and think, oh well, that's what the majority of Europeans think. There could be a lot of people, you're missing it, who think differently for them. It's a stereotype that you're always going to get with the United States, and therefore, it's just one of these things.
Hi, I'm Ben, and right now I'm traveling through Europe, and I figured I would ask Europeans along the way, what do they think of Americans?
And this is the thing that I've got to touch upon before we go on, is the very fact that there's a colossal difference between Europe as a continent to that of the United States of America, which is a continent with each individual state being an individual country or whatever, historically very different. Culturally, I would imagine that it's pretty similar across the board. I wouldn't say entirely, I would probably say there are certain cultural differences between state to state. In Europe, you've got each individual country are all different from one another. I'm talking about entirely different. There's big cultural differences and they all speak different languages and that. Different food, different way of life, different culture and stuff. And no doubt there is certain things that cross over. Hell, it's even the same thing with that of Scotland to England. You could cross the border from Scotland into England and you will notice there are certain cultural differences. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. There are, of course, cultural similarities because it's the United Kingdom, who are, sense of humour's very different. Well, Scotland alone is got a very, very dark sense of humour. I'm not saying England hasn't, but it's a very different sense of humour that they've got to Scotland. I think that's the beauty about Europe. So like I say, with the collective term Europeans, it's not really something you can use in the same manner, purely because of the fact each individual country is all different from one another. It's like comparing a country like Poland that's very, very different. So people could stereotype Poland as being very right-wing, and then you could look at and compare that to a country like Spain. Spain is typically viewed as left-wing, and so what you've got there is a strong difference between the two of them. Again, in these other videos, asking the questions to particular people who seem to be so anti-gun ownership when it comes to speaking about Americans. But again, you have to think about who that person that's making the video, are they asking just those sort of people? Even in these individual countries, I could guarantee you're going to come across other folk who disagree with their views. That it's not as simple as just taking for their word, making it out as if they're the majority. Again, I will go on and I will explain how there's a difference between mainstream media, social media, to that of people you meet outside.
I want you to be as honest as you can, all right? Yeah. So what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Americans?
Loud.
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 Is it loud?
Pretty loud sometimes.
Loud. Everyone says loud.
So I think the stereotype is partly true about being loud or what have you. It can mean two things. Well, first of all, certain Americans have got that stereotype that when they go abroad they love to be centre of attention and being very loud, they speak loud or what have you, and some people can take that in the wrong way. The other side of being very loud and the stereotype is more to do with when Americans are talking over one another. It's way of speaking to one another, and in a social group they typically do talk over one another. It's not entirely the case. That's the perception. What I'm telling you is that's the perception that certain folk here would have of Americans, and I'm talking about Scotland in general. I'm talking about perhaps other countries as well. There is general truth to it to some extent with certain individuals, but it's not going to apply to everybody.
Friendly, like nice, good teeth.
They like to drink beer. They're nice people. they like drinking as the Austrians.
Enthusiastic.
I think most of the responses that you're pretty much getting there is a pretty positive response. Well, Americans probably think that so many people hate them, and probably because, our president or something to do with interference elsewhere, and don't get me wrong, you're going to come across the arguments against the United States because of political issues, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's going to be the case further on into this video, but a good number of them are not so enthusiastic in terms of where things are going, and I don't blame them, and I don't think that's any different for here. It's going to be the same no matter what country you go to.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Americans?
Superficial.
Now, that one in particular I found interesting is superficial, because I've came across certain American people that lived in Europe a lengthy period of time or whatever, and they went back to America, and one of them commented that for their experience going back, it was a big culture shock. The culture shock is that they felt that everything's very face value, that it's all about work, and if they ask you a question to get to know you, then it's all about what you do for a living, in other words, your job. And even when it comes to, take for example, the restaurants, because when you come here to Britain, and you go to restaurants here, they're not trying to rush you out the door. They're not trying to, get your money and get you out the door as fast as possible. You could book a table and you could eat your dinner and you can spend there as long as you want and speak as long as you want, and typically it's relaxed and it's not some sort of immediate service, right? Here's your food, like, eat that, and then here's the bill and get you out the door, and that's it. Because I understand the value of hard work and everything, and it's not the message I'm putting across. As the person was basically saying, they felt that when it came to friendships, it was all face value. It wasn't real. It was fake, in other words. The thing is with that though, and I can understand where they're coming from to a varying extent, you're gonna get certain folk like that here in this country that are two-faced and backstabbers and would use you and stuff like that. That's just the truth of the matter. I think there are a lot of really, for what I've came across anyway, so many good American people I've came across because of my YouTube channel and stuff like that. So yeah, it really depends on who you're basically talking to.
We like Americans. They are always quite cool. They like fast food. We don't like that so much, but when we are there, we enjoy it.
I mean, the Stereotypes is like the kind of fat and all that.
Fast food.
They eat a lot of food, like the portions are like really big. Burgers and Coke.
Food very fast.
I think of fast food restaurants. Five Guys. I love Five Guys.
Which is an interesting thing today with the whole fast food culture, and don't get me wrong, in these countries you'll get the McDonald's, the Burger Kings, and culturally for different place to place is all going to be different. Asking Europeans that question, well, is Britain exactly the same as these other European countries? Well, no, not really. It should be no coincidence to you why in the American South they deep fry everything, because that is basically Scottish. That even English don't even understand Scotland for that. We deep fry everything. It's something that Scotland's famous for, and this is exactly what I mean. I mean, we're more similar in that respect, and likewise with England, especially stuff like black pudding and that bit. And you're going to get again the stereotype that Americans, they typically eat large portions. I mean, I remember one funny story. Two American friends or whatever went into Pizza Hut, I think it was in Glasgow or what. They were basically chucked out eventually because they were eating that much. If anything, that company should be bloody well grateful to them, because they're making an absolute killing off them. But yes, they do have large portions, and yes, Americans, they love their food. Again, it goes down that stereotype whole thing of being obese. Italian food's not exactly going to be the same as other food. They typically take a lot of the olive oils, which is really healthy, but then they have a lot of pasta. So a lot of their food is based on pasta and that, and it can be fattening. It just depends on where you're talking about. Our food isn't exactly the healthiest compared to many other countries. So if American Southerners have got anybody to blame, they can they can point the finger at Scotland.
Okay, so of all the things about America, the one thing you can think of...
And I think of Trump too.
Donald Trump.
Just like Donald Trump, innit? Just everyone hating on him or absolutely loving him. It's like one or the two.
There you go with the whole thing on Donald Trump and that, and it's expected, and it's like I say, depending on who you're asking, and I think those people are probably politically left-wing. This was the point that I was basically going to go into, and it was the point about the mainstream media and social media. Now, your perception of people and the answers you're getting for these videos, of course, they're handpicking a specific group of people, and that doesn't mean to say that, most Europeans are like that, or most Europeans are of the political left perspective. Social media can be a very powerful tool, a very influential tool that can influence things in a positive way, but also in a negative way. Prime example of that was the Scottish independence referendum and the build-up to it. All I was ever seeing, because I mostly view things from the perspective of, social media and what have you. Perhaps I'm guilty of this. You came across a lot of folk where it's all left-wing messages, holding up Labour Party placards, and if it's no the Labour Party placards, it's, SNP, and they're all arguing back and forth with one another. There were very much similarities between the nationalists and the unionists from that perspective of how social media would put things across. And the thing is that they would come across as very left-wing. Social media can be deceiving. For example, there were those who went around for the Scottish Libertarians and others who would go from door to door and speak to the different people, and what you would typically find is that the people didn't actually subscribe to entirely that perspective that you would get from the mainstream media, because the way the mainstream media would make it sound is almost as if most of Scotland is all hard left and they're all for communism and stuff. That's honestly the way that they would put things across. Social media, that you would get this perspective. You come across all these videos on Scottish independence and it's all anti-Thatcher this, anti-Thatcher that, anti-Thatcher this, anti-Thatcher that, anti-privatisation, anti-deregulation, anti. And this is the thing, because you've got to look at things that even for mainstream media, for example, a lot of the mainstream media is on social media these days, like the national newspaper that's designed for the sake of the argument for Scottish independence. And what you typically find for the national newspaper is that it does sway a bit to the left. A lot of its commenters are very much politically left, and that can give you the perception, this is what the majority of folk of Scotland are like, that, and that's how it can be deceiving. The difference between being there in person, outside, I've came across instances where I've spoken about certain problems at the gym or something like that, and somebody's overheard me and started agreeing with me, and I'm like, wow man, this is just something somebody I would never have expected. And I even remember there was one instance where I was going to get something fixed, partly my jewellery, it was, my Rangers pendant or something like that. I can't remember specifically what it was. Jumped into this wee place, the guy fixes, this sort of stuff like jewellery and stuff. You understand, I think he was fixing my chain because the wee clasp had broken or something like that. Well, obviously we were discussing about the lockdowns and what have you, because obviously it's affecting people, and I was blown away by the guy's response. What I've typically found is people who run their own small businesses like that guy, their argument is very, very different from the arguments I'm getting on social media. The arguments about how we need more tax, more regulation, more socialism, more this, that, and that. And this is the point, because the way this guy was arguing, it was a breath of fresh air. And I would imagine that there's so many good, honest, hard-working people out there across Scotland and elsewhere who are very much like that. It doesn't necessarily mean to say for the image that you're getting for social media and mainstream media that is the majority. You typically find that the large, loud majority are very quiet, go about their everyday life, and they're not really present on social media to that aspect. When you hear these people saying about Donald Trump and that, you're taking from one perspective, but I guarantee you would find out there's many people who agreed with Donald Trump in many things. I was personally critical of Donald Trump. I didn't feel and I didn't trust that he was going to move America towards this free market, and that's basically where I would love to see things go, regardless of being my own country as well, of course, over there in the United States. Although there was the talk about, tax cuts and deregulation, it's not true tax cuts, if you're not going to cut the budgetary issue, the budgetary cuts, if you're not going to carry out the budgetary cuts, if you're not going to cut the spending, it's not really true tax cuts, is what I'm basically trying to tell you. And so this was the problem with Donald Trump, because he just reallocated spending from one area of the economy to another area of the economy, which was to do with the military spending and all sorts. A lot of these people can't really give you a rational critique. They'll just, fling all sorts of stuff at them. But a video like this would probably give you the perception that the majority are against Donald Trump.
That president, he's the craziest president ever been seen, man. He's got to start a war in this world.
Doesn't mean to say that all Europeans think like that, because that isn't the case, folk. There are many that would disagree, and I really don't believe that for a second, because one thing that I did like Trump for was the fact that he was very good at making peace, and he certainly showed that way, the leader of North Korea. And I don't believe for a second that the war between Ukraine and Russia would have happened if Donald Trump was president of the United States, and that's just my perspective of things.
I like the Trump. Yeah.
You do?
Yes. I like it.
What do you like about Trump?
He's mean about the world and about the situation now.
You like him because he's mean?
Well, English isn't really our first language or that, but in terms of, I think what she means by mean, he's got a backbone, in other words. He's able to take action, he's able to do something, he's straight to the point, and I think that's why many people like her do like him. It's good to see that he actually asked somebody like that, and it's nice, it's a breath of fresh air, because in some of these other videos, and they would just have you believe that everybody in Europe is just, they're all against Donald Trump, and it's utter nonsense. It's a bit like if I go to college or university here and I'm surrounded by people who all despise Donald Trump and all despise capitalism, what do you expect? You're going to a college or a university?
He's very racist. He doesn't really know anything about politics.
If you were to ask, and I've seen videos like this in the United States, and some Americans asked fellow Americans, and they can't even answer the question why he's racist. You put them on the spot and they can't even give you an answer. To be honest with you, this word racist has become so overly used to a point that they've watered it down and bastardised it to a point that it's lost its credibility. It's a bit like saying, oh well, because people voted Brexit to leave the European Union, they must be all racists.
When you see like Americans, they're really open-minded, they're like, most of them are really smart, and we can't understand that Trump is your president.
That really depends on what he's basically telling you. When he says a lot of Americans are very smart, who's he talking about? Is he talking about people who are more persuasive towards socialism? Because I think that's where he's gone with this, right? How can he say that those who are for Donald Trump are not open-minded? In general terms, of course, there are a lot of very smart American people. Of course there is. You're going to come across folk who are generally ignorant of history, economics, and what have you. And I've even seen videos in Britain that are very similar to that, and they couldn't even name a political figure. They're able to name like these top TikTokers, and I've never even heard of, to be perfectly honest with you.
That's a big laugh, People voted for him. You get what you very voted for.
I know everyone basically in Europe is against Trump, but I think they needed a change. I just think that the two coasts dominated, and there's so many people in the middle, they don't get heard, and they're finally getting heard. Again,
folk, it's not true. Not everybody in Europe. There's a lot of people who would have favoured Donald Trump and were thankful. I mean, these people make it sound as if the left only exists. Social media and mainstream media can make it sound as if we're just some minority, and they always use it. The mainstream media has always been good at that one. They call everything far right, because everything to the right of communism is far right. Everything's far right. It's always the same. They support immigration control, far right. Always say, well, you're a fascist, and so it's not really like that.
I do like in America that everyone's kind of, if you're born there, you're American, and if you're from another country and you're moving to Austria and your children are born here, you're still like, yeah, I'm from Austria, but my heritage is this and that.
I'm not entirely sure where she was going with that, really. I couldn't really make heads or tails out yet. to be perfectly honest with you. You know, certain folk become offended by Americans saying that I'm Scottish or I'm Irish or I'm such and such or I'm this, that and the next thing. I've got nothing against American people who want to say that, oh, I'm Irish or I'm Scottish or I'm this, that and the next thing. Now, you know, there are a lot of American people that are very, very proud of their heritage, and especially their Scottish heritage. A lot of the American Scots show more interest in their heritage of Scotland than a lot of fellow Scots do. That's the truth. I don't even know what my heritage is. I don't even know what clan I'm properly for, because I've never done one of those things, but there's a lot of American Scots that they've gone full blown into it. They're not meaning anything offensive by that. And I've always says that it doesn't matter where people come from, elsewhere in Europe, or folk coming out to Scotland for the United States or even Canada or elsewhere. Whenever foreigners come here to Scotland, I'm always more than welcome to them, because it always gives me a sense of pride. I absolutely love seeing people come here visiting my dear country and loving Scotland. And I've got nothing against Americans saying that they're such and such in their heritage, but I'm not entirely sure where she was going. I've always got a sense of pride because it's an identity, and Scotland certainly scored a strong identity within, you know, not just the modern world, but that of the United States alone. The impact that Scotland had on what would become the United States is absolutely massive, and it always gives me that sense of pride.
America is the land of chance, of opportunity.
Actually, I think of the American dream, like this way from the dishwasher to a millionaire. You can't make everything if you just wanted to make it and do it.
So I don't think that she was meaning it in a negative context. I think she was positive in what she was basically saying, but there is no truth to that, you know, land of opportunity, perhaps to certain other places and that. I've even came across these conservative movements. Now, I like them. PragerU or Turning Point USA, they've got positive messages, they support free markets, they support reducing the size and power of the state and stuff. I understand that, but sometimes the message that they're putting across, you get these certain conservatives that come across and they argue that they somehow need more government to solve the problem. I don't understand why. A lot of the times you come across things like PragerU and they use the term free market as if to say that there's somehow a free market today, and it's the wrong message to put across to anybody, because there's no truth to it whatsoever. The entire private sector's all regulated by the state. They're putting across is almost as if to say, well, it's the land of opportunity, you should just work hard, just accept the system of what's in the place the day. These Marxists and the, you know, other socialists, I actually agree with them to a varying extent. There is a problem with today's economy, and I don't buy into all that stuff about, you know, land of opportunity, because essentially the system you've got today is corporatist, that restricts competition, restricts opportunity. They've driven inflation and debt sky high through the roof, and they've basically cripple people's opportunity. A lot of the times, in order for them to become something, well, if they go through college, what they call university, well, if they go through that, they're putting themselves through mountains of student debt in order to just to basically try and get anywhere. But the entire system is broke, and that's one thing that I agree with socialists upon. What I do not agree with the socialists upon is that the solution is socialism, and that we somehow live in a capitalist system today here in Britain or the United States. And when it comes to the United States, it most certainly is not a capitalist system. That whole thing about being the land of opportunity and people flooding all was based on capitalism, was based on the free market, and that was the case at one point. It's almost as if to say, well, this is the best we've got, just accept what you've got and that's it. That's the perception you get for the likes of PragerU, and it just isn't how things are. The US certainly isn't today that country where it used to be.
I think like people look at America and they like idolise it. You know, like, oh, it's America. Yeah, like everyone wants to go to America.
I was pretty keen about going to America, but I think the whole Trump has put me off. Like, I'm not as keen to go anymore. It wouldn't be the top of my list.
It happens to be politically left-wing, and there you go, but that's no the perception of a lot of other folk.
When I think of America, I think instantly about guns.
Like, I just don't see why you need to have a gun.
In Poland, guns are really hard to get. It's still kind of illegal.
And here, it's not that easy to get a gun.
There's far too many guns in America. Of course, their laws need to be restricted, and it's really hard for us to understand because in Ireland there is no guns. The police aren't armed. It's just so systemic in your culture. I don't know how you could change it, but you definitely need to try.
None of them really understand it because they're looking at things for face value, and I've seen these other videos and I could obviously respond on the other videos, but well, oh look, there's all these mass shootings and that's just a black and white perspective, and it's the same with those other videos that I was speaking about. Not one of them have mentioned anything at all today with the No Gun Zone Act of 1990, which was basically a government legislation passed in 1990, meaning that in all the No Gun Zone Act areas, all those areas where the No Gun Zone Act is, Americans can't carry guns. They're not allowed to, so they can't bear arms in those places. Therefore, when it came to all these schools and places like that, those are the no-gun zone areas. Now, isn't it a coincidence that more than 96% of all mass shootings have all taken place in the no-gun zone areas? Why is it that the vast majority, more than 96%, why did they all happen in the very areas where the No Gun Zone Act was, where Americans can't carry guns? Well, the answer's rather quite simple. Do you honestly think they would try that in places where Americans can easily carry a gun, pull a gun out and shoot them and end their life? Of course no. That's the reason why most of the shootings happened in those areas. And the answer isn't as simple as just saying gun ownership and that's it, especially the lack of opportunity and the problems within the American economy. A mental health issue is another issue that you can drag into this. It's not as simple as looking at things for black and white and saying, well, it's just because you own guns and that's it. If that was the case, then explain why Switzerland, a gun ownership country, had the lowest crime rate in the world. I mean, that's exactly what I mean. Isn't it typical that the people that he asked were people that just happened to be against the guns? It gives Americans the perception as if to say this is what the majority of folk in Europe think.
It's a big country, man.
Yeah.
Got big problems.
We do.
Yeah.
The Netherlands has got serious problems because of being part of the European Union, and one of the big problems that they've got is to do with the agriculture. Now, I'm not saying that the United States is this free country as I've touched upon before. It certainly has its own problems with the police state and all sorts, and folk getting arrested for some of the silliest reasons. You show me a country across Europe that hasn't got serious problems, you'd be hard pushed to even find that. And again, if you're asking somebody that's of political left persuasion, they're going to view the United States as this capitalist country. Would they have known anything at all today with the No Gun Zone Act of 1990? No. Would they have known anything about the healthcare with regards to the American Medical Association monopoly, the overregulation of the private sector, the third-party peer system, the monopolisation of licensing, the introduction of insurance for bloody well everything? Would they have known anything at all today with that? And do they even know that direct primary care exists? Of course they don't, folk. It would have actually been funny to see them go to a country like Poland and ask those sort of questions. I'm no surprised why he never though. So anyway, folk, thank you for watching my video. If you've got any questions, feel free to comment in the comment section below. And that's just my perception of things. Thank you for watching. Cheers.